To today's webinar. We're going to focus on this month's webinar just around preparing for year end, and obviously with a specific focus around BlackLine. I think everybody we have on today's call is an existing BlackLine user that we've got now. Move to the next slide. Just in terms of what I want to cover, so there'll be a little bit just at the beginning, just around Continuate. I think most of the people on the call will be aware of Continuate. I'll give a little bit of introduction on myself, and then we'll really get into the kind of the content for today, which is to say really around preparing kind of for year end. So a little bit of the kind of the what and the why, and a little bit of how will be included in there as well. And then I want to break it down into kind of three subtopics, which is people, process, and technology. As we go through this call, I do have some time there at the end. You'll see for questions. Certainly, if there's any questions that anybody has during the session, feel free to put them into the chat. We have some other people from Continuate on the call that will answer them, and if we're not able to answer it during the call, then I'll aim to pick it up just at the end in the last kind of few minutes as well. So just a little bit about Continuate here, just in case anybody's not aware. So we are a boutique consultancy, effectively made up of transformation professionals. We've got some transformation experts, some system experts, and some qualified accountants, and you can see there in the bubbles some of the services that we offer. So around, that consulting partner, and we are very much a BlackLine partner, and also some other kind of software providers, albeit some of them are in slightly different spaces instead of the kind of the reconciliations. We also do some RTR transformation services, and also some work around the shared services transformation as well. In terms of why we're different maybe from some of our competitors, certainly some of the larger accounting firms and so on as well, we very much focus on the adoption. We are not here to effectively tick a box to say that we've implemented something. We want to make sure, effectively what we implement is successful, and ultimately it's then adopted by the end users, and ultimately yourselves as customers or clients ultimately then get the most out of the application, and ultimately what you've the money that you've spent on that as well. We are very agile. We can form teams and get projects spun up very quickly, and in the past we've also won some awards for some of the programs that we've led previously as well. If I just talk a little bit about myself before we get into the content. So my name's Alan Piper. I've been at Continuate now for a couple of years. I'm a senior manager within the technical delivery. In terms of BlackLine, I've been using BlackLine pretty much now for just over 10 years. I was originally a customer back in the day, and then I've effectively gone down that career route in terms of subsequently implementing it. So obviously, I think it's a very good tool, given that's where my kind of career's gone. And I've done many projects through from beginning to the end. Worked on the new implementations, and also worked on some optimization for existing BlackLine customers as well. Hands up, I haven't been an end user for the system, but I'd like to think I can give a reconciliation a pretty good crack in terms of actually doing one. Now, we've also got Zach on the slide today. He's on the call, but you won't hear from Zach today, but Zach is kind of fed into some of the information in this pack. And again, Zach's got an experience around with BlackLine as well. Okay, so if I maybe just get into the actual content in terms of the kind of the year-end review. So it's very much highly recommended that there's additional activities performed ahead of year end, the reporting cycle, just in relation to the BlackLine financial close process. Now, I guess today I'm probably very much focusing on specific modules within BlackLine, so the reconciliation, matching, and journals. We're not really going to talk about things like FRA or anything today. Now, effectively, these activities that we're doing at year end here is really designed to ensure that BlackLine is optimally configured, and ultimately trying to meet those kind of reporting, policy, governance, audit, and process requirements. And ultimately, this year end review does require input from various stakeholders, and I guess if you've implemented with Continuate, we run a series of design workshops, and effectively this year end review is a bit of the same, but just effectively a bit more kind of targeted that we've got. So we're going to cover really three key areas, and I talked about these in the agenda. So people, process, and technology. I just want to talk a little bit about the BlackLine reporting module. As I said at the beginning, I've been using the system for more than 10 years, so I remember before there was a reporting layer, across the application. But this is, I've lifted this slide directly from the design sessions, and you can see the kind of three areas of kind of focus. They're really a treasure trove of information within BlackLine, and a lot of that can help shape that year-end review. So the first bucket we have here is operational. So you can see, the types of reports that we've got in here. So, looking at things like the volume of accounts, the number of recs, that can be slightly different because of grouping, the volumes by person. So again, just to make sure that we've given somebody effective and achievable level of or number of reconciliations that they can perform. That kind of balance between key and non-key, which is really related back to the risk rating. And then, the volumes by entity and stuff as well. We then move into compliance. So again, we can see, a whole load of information. This is maybe a bit more historical in terms of some of the timeliness. Do we have a challenge with I don't know, certain entities, certain user groups, whatever it may be, just in terms of actually being able to complete the recs in time. Some of the workflow aspects, aging of any kind of reconciling items that sit within it, and also some of the classifications around that as well. Any kind of action plans, that anybody's generated, if any of the requires adjustments, and then the timeliness, as I say, of those action plans, and making sure ultimately, I think we could all accept that things go wrong from time to time, but it's really just making sure that, we take the required steps in terms of actually, correcting those. And again, from a process improvement perspective, so again, we can begin to look at, how long do we expect, a reconciliation to take? Again, you can begin to look at some of that information within BlackLine, and obviously a little bit of information there around some of the auto certifications. So that's obviously where the system is completing the reconciliation on behalf of the end users, any aging, and also the categorization. So yeah, I'll say again, because I did feel the pain 10 years ago when there was a lot more limited reporting. There is a huge amount of information that we can get, directly from the system, albeit that doesn't cover the full kind of year-end kind of process. I've also just lifted this slide again from one of our design packs, and because I think it's really good just in terms of thinking about how some of the settings work, and ultimately how that kind of feeds into some of the policy. So the kind of the diagram on the left hand side there is a little bit of an onion peel, so we can see we're really kind of starting off at that outside level in terms of some of the application settings, and then kind of drilling a bit into a bit more detail around some of the policy items. We get into due dates, risk ratings, frequencies, thresholds, and so on. And then we're into things like the master data, period end dates, and so on as well. And then the bottom level here is the kind of the segment combination. Now there are literally hundreds of settings with BlackLine obviously being a kind of SaaS application. It's very much configuration over customization. So we recommend it through the initial design sessions if it's a new implementation, but certainly for the year end, it's very much focused on those key settings as they really shape the majority of the kind of the design as well. Most things in BlackLine can be changed. There's always one or two things that require a bit more effort or maybe require a bit of input from BlackLine themselves. But 95% of it, can be changed kind of relatively easily as well. We do generally recommend not to try and, I guess, add multiple ways to do the same sort of thing. So, there's, like comments, comments can be added in multiple places within the application. And again, we want to kind of, I guess, streamline that process and create a kind of standard approach, for a customer or a client. Now that standard approach may be different per each client, but as I say, there's, maybe try to limit, some of the flexibility in terms of the way users can enter some of the data. Next comment down here is just around go live. Again, from our design pack, we don't generally recommend to change things right away unless there is, a very critical issue. To some extent, it does you need to let the kind of process bed down a little bit and let the end users kind of get used to it as well. And then the final point really on the slide really is what we're here to talk about today, which is the kind of the year-end review. And obviously that should be done on an ongoing basis, and year end is generally the time when we see most customers or clients actually perform this kind of review. Okay, so if we can maybe drill into some of these kind of lower level sections that I mentioned in one of the previous slides. So in terms of from a people perspective, so people, in terms of the year activities, normally fall into kind of two distinct groups. So we've got kind of end users and then other key stakeholders. Other key stakeholders is maybe a bit of a wide category here, but as I say, it's kind of the two categories that we've got. So these are the types of questions that I guess we would expect kind of end users to be asking, and this may be something that's centrally led, but again, it's just trying to, I guess, prompt some action, I guess, ahead of kind of year end. So from an end user perspective, the first kind of three bullets here are really around, can I effectively do my job? Do I have the correct roles assigned to me? That I guess some users may have different roles within different modules that are slightly different. So again, just making sure that everything is set up the way you would look. Do you have the correct access to the entities or the teams? And ultimately, do I have the correct assignments assigned to me? Or if I do have incorrect assignments, what actions have I taken? Rather than just leaving the reconciliation open and saying it's not for me, it's assigned wrongly. Making sure we're proactive and taking those steps to make sure it gets reassigned to the correct person. I also think it's key to completed prior months reconciliation or matching or whatever it is. In terms of the particular modules. Again, we're really just making from an end user perspective, making your own life a bit easier. Make sure that the prior months or maybe a quarterly reconciliation, the prior quarter is fully up to date basically, and it'll just smooth that process at year end. And obviously, I appreciate there's some competing priorities at year end, not just BlackLine, but just the wider processes as well. Similarly, my action plans and any action items from the matching, and ultimately is that matching, fully up to date. Again, just trying to make my life a little bit easier at that critical time, at year end. If I need any additional tasks created, my process has changed in some way. Again, have I effectively flagged that back to my system admin so they can actually make the changes within the system? And am I aware of any kind of policy or guidance changes that have come throughout the year? So again, just to make sure that is effectively factored into the reconciliations at year end. And then the final one here is, have I been informed of any BlackLine improvements? BlackLine do the kind of quarterly releases, and there's certainly been a heavy focus on AI. And I think hopefully everyone will have seen last month, they changed the view reconciliation screen and brought some AI into that, effectively an advanced search. But 6 months ago, they'd also brought in some improvements around effectively getting AI to generate document descriptions and stuff like that as well. So again, it's these kind of, I guess, small incremental improvements that effectively make the life a bit easier for the end users. And then from another key stakeholders perspective, probably coming at it from a process owner perspective, but am I comfortable with the policy and guidelines? Have any audit findings from last year been factored in? Have we effectively closed those gaps that we potentially had in a prior year? Do I have confidence that BlackLine itself is configured correctly? And then, effectively, do I have confidence that the accounting teams can successfully execute the year-end activities in BlackLine? And some of that, I guess it's from a technical perspective, but also thinking back to my previous slide where I talked about some of the operational things, the metrics and so on, the number of recs assigned. Do I have somebody that's got 500 recs assigned? That's probably unachievable, in a short space of time for somebody to be able to turn that many reconciliations around to a good quality, in effectively a relatively short window, again, with some of the competing priorities as well. Okay, if I move here to the process slide here, so again, fundamental to this process is fundamental to the year-end review is the process, and a lot of this is generally driven by the policy or guidance associated with the financial close process, and ultimately want to make sure this is reflective of the latest business requirements ahead of year-end, and then ultimately into the the new financial year. Again, this process is generally led through a kind of series of mini workshops, and ultimately we then have the key stakeholders, operational leads, and certainly the BlackLine system admin included in those sessions. Now, I think prior experience has told us this is not always the quickest process to turn around. I can just sometimes with the time of year, other priorities and so on. So we do recommend that this process effectively kicks off 6 to 8 weeks ahead of year end, really allow time for those discussions and to be had, and then ultimately there may be some testing required in BlackLine before we can actually make the change into production as well. In terms of some of the key activities, so again, similar format here just in terms of some of the questions, but ultimately does the policy or guideline accurately reflect the latest business requirement? If not, what needs changed and who needs to agree to that particular change? I appreciate sometimes things like policies need to go to controls or risk teams for a kind of review and then a kind of final sign off as well. Have recent BlackLine releases been factored in to further enhance the financial close process? So again, just keen to I guess effectively pick up the latest technology to kind of streamline that process as much as we can. Any audit findings I mentioned previously, so again, make sure that they're incorporated into the design, and we've closed off anything that was found from a prior year. And the last one here, I always think it's slightly forgotten about, to be honest. But ultimately, do we have any kind of other user groups that have fed back? So from an end user, I know some organizations potentially have like a financial close working group, and BlackLine will form part of that, where they talk about some improvements and get any feedback as well. But yeah, I always think the end users should definitely be consulted, because ultimately they're the people doing the job, and they can also offer some additional insights as well. But really a collective from the various kind of stakeholders. On the box here on the right, I've got effectively a list of some of the activities or some of the areas that should be kind of an area for focus. Certainly not an exhaustive list by any means, but I think some of the key things we see is ultimately people going to review that risk profiling. Did I effectively have maybe too many high risk accounts last year? Or did something come out in the audit that ultimately means I need to adapt that risk profiling in some way? Generally speaking, we do see risk profiling linked to frequency and level of sign-off. So maybe the high risk accounts, get done monthly, and then on a quarterly basis, they go for the review step on top of the, the standard approval step and so on as well. So again, it's something well worth considering. Any grouping policies as well. So again, BlackLine, ultimately, technically, we can group everything into one reconciliation if we really wanted to, but ultimately, it's kind of again standardizing that process and making sure that we've got a kind of standard approach to it as well. Same with the auto certification rules. We may want to add some additional auto certification rules in. I think there's maybe 12 in the system overall. Some of I think probably the majority of auto certification probably comes from maybe 2 or 3 of these. A lot of it around some of the inactivity rules, probably more than anything else. But there's maybe the opportunity to look at maybe some of the more advanced templates, which again drives some more auto certification, around it, and again just lessen the workload effectively for the end users at year end, whilst covering off the risk and so on. Also got thresholds in here, some of the additional templates, MI review as well. So again, we want to make sure that we get good insight into the process. And I've said it a few times now, but the reporting in BlackLine is fantastic. So again, do we want to try and leverage some more of that to gain some additional insights? And that could be things like, maybe that I haven't considered before, but like rejection reports. So, you can begin to find out, is there particular users that actually, have received, or have had a lot of their reconciliation rejected. And then it's maybe, well, why is that? And then again, we can begin to close some of that off. Is it a training issue? Is it something else? From that perspective as well. And then also from the last point here is just in relation to some of the matching. So again, we want to always, I guess, the past rules and the matching criteria, it should always be a continuous process. We want to look to refine that process as much as we can. And again, the year end kind of is a good time to, have a look at that as well. Okay, my final section here is just around the technology. So primarily BlackLine itself, but I would also argue this should cover any of the underlying systems, where whether we've got any integrations or not that ultimately play a kind of key factor in the role. So I don't know, maybe someone's going into a different system to go and get some evidence of substantiation. So it's just making sure that effectively all of these systems are working correctly, and ultimately people are able to kind of access these as well. We generally see that the technology element is led by the assigned BlackLine system administrator. Is normally they have the ownership of the clients or customers instance of the BlackLine application. We do also generally see there can be a little bit of engagement with the IT teams, especially if you're using kind of bespoke or client-specific extracts and so on as well, rather than the connector. So we know any other feeds, and I guess that's probably a bit more common, probably with the transaction matching as well. So again, just worth bearing in mind, obviously, just that IT element. But in terms of the questions, we would generally expect the system admin to be asking. So, ultimately, has any of the underlying architecture changed or expected to change into the following year? And ultimately, that should include the integration frequency as well. So again, just making sure that that effectively we're able to get data from point A to point B in a kind of a consistent and a kind of timely manner, so people can actually perform their role. Do the global or the application settings still align with the policy? So I talked about some of these on the previous slide. So again, frequencies, level of sign-off, certification thresholds, and that's really why we would expect the system admin to be part of that kind of process piece, because ultimately they're going to go and make the changes into the application itself. Do individual module settings align with the policy? So I guess probably more of the same. But again, there's those kind of overarching systems with settings within BlackLine, and then there's the individual module settings as well. So again, just making sure everything is aligned and effectively reflects the requirements. Any step outs been agreed, documented, and then configured in BlackLine. Sometimes a global policy does not work for all areas, and ultimately there can be those step outs. So again, just to make sure all of that's set up correctly within the system and ultimately agreed as well. And then any individual reconciliation settings, again, generally speaking, where there's a step out from a kind of global design. And then have I got all the required entities included as well? So again, just that kind of completeness check again ahead of kind of year end. If I move to the kind of the right hand slide here, so a little bit here around past rules. So again, a little bit what I've kind of said in the prior slide. So again, have these been reviewed? Is there any areas for improvement around those? Have any integrations been working consistently with no errors? And if not, who should I contact to? The last thing we want is at year end to find that GL balances aren't working or something, and effectively then we stop the reconciliation process because we effectively can't get the balances into the system. So there's maybe a little bit of looking back as in terms of any other kind of issues that we've had. And it's worth bearing in mind, sometimes we see extracts will work fine in the middle of the month, but around that key time when there's potentially lots of other jobs or whatever else running in the main ERP, do we have an issue actually at working day 2 or something like that as well? So again, it's just trying to be as prepared as we possibly can, within the system. Have the following years been created within BlackLine, or the periods been created within BlackLine? Again, admin will need to do this. Effectively, the extracts will bounce from BlackLine or error on import if we haven't created periods. So again, it's always worthwhile doing that in December ahead of the following year. There's always a bit of a question as to how many periods we create, whether it be 6 months or a year. And again, that can differ from client to client. But as long as we have the periods there that we're going to import in the short term, I think that's probably the key part. Similar, as static data, so that's some of the drop downs mainly that you'll see in BlackLine. So again, do they have the latest values in that? And again, go back to some of my reporting points for earlier, for using things like reason codes. Again, it can really help to surface, some of the underlying reasons why, things get rejected, or, things are marked as requires adjustment as well. So just allowing a bit more of a kind of deeper dive into the data. Are all the assignments complete? Now, anyone who's familiar with the system admin screen will know that is a box on the dashboard, but it's not uncommon for us to see, a fairly decent amount of accounts unassigned. So again, we just want to make sure that everything's assigned. And from a system admin perspective, effectively we're ready to hand that process off to the end users. And then, are there any levers, and do we have enough licenses? Obviously, BlackLine, I guess their cost basis on a license model in terms of the way they charge for the application. So there's always, I guess, from customers and clients, a keenness to keep, the cost down, so therefore limit the licenses. But, fundamentally, do we have enough licenses? And it's not uncommon for, I guess, for clients to have maybe like 1 or 2 left out of their pool. But again, it's just thinking a little bit further ahead in case, any additional entities or, user groups that you're going to onboard onto the system. Again, just making sure that you're ready for that, basically. And then the final thing here is just around the BlackLine release notes. I know not always the most exciting reading in the world, but yeah, there's generally a mixture of, I guess, things in there. So there's a lot of bug fixes and that type of thing. But as I say, there's been a lot of focus on AI and some of the improvements that are coming, and basically that's how we find out about them, is through the release notes. I'll also mention that we do on those releases on LinkedIn, we do put out a post every time there's a release and just kind of highlight the top 5 basically as well. So maybe if you don't want to read the whole document, you can maybe potentially refer to our LinkedIn post, and it will give you a bit of a steer for some of the key changes coming out of the release notes as well. So that was all the content I was going to cover. I'm not sure. Let me just double check if there's any questions.
There's one in the chat.
Yeah, so I think this is from Abby. Do you have any feedback from your clients on how well the AI summarization works? Not directly from a client, Abby. We've tested it ourselves, and I know there's, I don't want to call it limitations because I don't think it's limitations, but for an Excel file, it reads the first tab, for example. But I think, and certainly through our testing, it's worked pretty well. But as I say, I've not had any feedback directly from a client or anything that's using it.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I just I was just looking how when it works really. So yeah, it's good to know. I'll feedback if I find anything.
Okay. Sounds good. Cool. Brian, you've got a question?
Yeah, Brian Miller, National Services Scotland. Just a quick question. It's not particular about year end, but one of the points you were raising was to review the action items, which is not something that we've used. I wasn't really aware of it, if I'm honest. When we do our reconciliations, we'll put comments on the recs, but it's quite hard to keep on top of whether comments have been actioned, and I wondered whether this is something that could help track that. If you could maybe explain how they work.
Yeah, so I guess action items, Brian, is very much like the action plans. Action items sit within the transaction matching module. So I've got I've got something that's aged past when I would expect it to clear, and then you effectively add an action item to that. So it's terminology probably more than anything. So it really is the same. So the equivalent for a rec would be the action plan. Do you use the action plans today?
No, it's not something we use. As I say, when we're reviewing the recs, we'll put comments on them. Sometimes I would put comments to say, we need to clear X, Y, and Z off. But it doesn't have like a permanent tracker on it. So is the action plan something that would work? I suppose it needs to be directly connected to the rec. That's the key thing.
Yeah, so effectively when you mark something as requires adjustment, if you've turned on the action plans and there's some configuration options around the action plans, there's maybe in total about 7 extra boxes that appear, but you can control some of those boxes, if that makes sense. So like you have an action owner, an action location, the action plan itself, and then like an action date. It's very easy to turn on. I mean, there's a couple of tick boxes, to be honest. It's probably more just with a bit of engagement with the end users. And actually with the last change that BlackLine did around the view rec screen, so traditionally that would just have shown like your list of reconciliations basically. There's now a button at the top of that screen that lets you view all of the items as well. So you can see all effectively the analysis lines you've added into the reconciliation. You can then filter on the R's and then look at the action plans and say, well, these are the ones I expect to have fixed by the end of November. I've still not done it. And that's where, from an oversight perspective, which it sounds like what you're doing, that's where you would then step in and say, well, why hasn't this been corrected yet?
That sounds quite useful. So we'll just get in touch with our continuing representative to talk through that. Thanks.
Yeah, that sounds fine. And you can report on all of that through the reporting and stuff as well. I appreciate we're bang on time, but just in case there's any other questions at all from anybody. No? Okay. Let me just quickly cover off the next steps very quickly. So, if there is any more questions, and Brian, it sounds like you're going to reach out to us just on this, then also please do feel free to reach out to myself. We'll share the recording with everybody that's on the call, and if there's any questions, let me know. And then I've also put the link to our LinkedIn page as well. So again, as I mentioned earlier, we put the top 5 releases on there every time there's a release, but we also share a whole bunch of other information on BlackLine, and then, as I say, some of the other software that we work with as well. Okay, if there's no other questions, then I think we can probably just close this call off just now. And I'll thank you for your time. And as I say, any other questions, please do feel free to reach out and we can pick up that way. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Cheers. Thanks.
Thanks, Alan. Thanks. Bye.